Thank you so much for meeting us here today, Kari, for your artist talk about the Post-Apocalyptic exhibition at Stonington in April 2022. Really excited to have you, and your work is absolutely beautiful and vibrant and just so stunning. The opening day was amazing, and I just know a lot of folks here were really blown away by your new artwork. So I can't wait to hear more about your process and your background as an artist. So let's just get started. And if you could share more about your background as an artist and where you're based.
My name is Kari Morgan. My Nishka name is Kalajach. I come from the house of Quiskain, and my crest is the wolf crest, and my house crest is the white grizzly bear. My family on my dad's side is Nishka, and my mom's side is German, French, English, and in my Métis is Scottish and Sioux. And I'm based out of Terrace, British Columbia, Canada, and from originally the next town over towards the ocean, Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada.
Awesome, thank you. So share a little bit about your artwork and, well, specifically your art background and how you got started as an artist, to like how you became inspired in using the current art process and mediums that you use today. Like, take us through the journey of your professional art career.
Well, I've always done art. I've always gravitated towards art since I was really little. My father's side of the family, we come from a long line of carvers and painters. And a lot of my dad's side of the family, they all do First Nations art as well. So I grew up in my household. My mother is very crafty and she likes to do textile work. So she's been sewing for a very long time. And I've been sewing since I was 6. And then my father, he's a very realistic drawer and sketcher. So I kind of gravitated towards that when I was before I started creating a career out of First Nation fine arts. And he's also very inventive. So without really pushing me in the artistic direction, I've always just kind of been around it. So my family was very, very healthy in allowing me to have that space instead of forcing me to go in a different direction. It's just the way that I naturally gravitated towards. And then when I didn't have a direction, I finally decided to learn a lot more about my own cultural background. So I went to Frida Deasing School of Northwest Coast Art, where I studied under Dempsey Bob and Ken McNeil and Stan Bevan. And I learned a lot more of how to do our traditional art properly. And then at this point, I'm still learning, and it's kind of difficult not to put your own personality onto your artwork as well, because it's just kind of the way that you naturally gravitate towards too. So now I mostly enjoy carving. I mainly enjoy carving with alder or cedars. And I also do a lot of painting, but I prefer only painting on wood. I do murals, so it would be on different types of brick or metal backgrounds. But my favorite is still painting on wood.
Can you talk about who or what inspired your exhibition that we have here at Stonington called Post-Apocalyptic?
So the title Post-Apocalyptic is kind of the play on what you would assume would be a story or a movie that you would see after a global catastrophe. So post-apocalyptic is to kind of express how we were for many, many years not allowed to do a lot of our traditions, including our First Nations fine art. It is the way that it is our written language. We don't have a written language. We are a verbal community, and we tell our stories verbally, but we have our stories also kind of written down through paintings and carvings and totem poles. So it is kind of like our written language as well as our spiritual connection. So when we weren't allowed to do that for a long time, and I think it was only allowed like legally in the 70s to actually start doing our art again. some people managed to make it survive, and very few people still knew a lot of the actual rules and the history behind everything. So I'm very fortunate that I have my teachers that I went to school and learned under, who really saw that this was something that needed to be passed on because we weren't allowed to do it for so long. So post-apocalyptic is expressing how we still push through, even though we kind of went through a global catastrophe. And then at the same time, it's talking about like how we kind of have this pandemic going on, and now we're kind of post-apocalyptic, and how everyone is just kind of, they're in a way evolving and learning how to adapt. So a lot of my pieces, every single one of my piece in the show actually isn't traditional 100%. The closest one would be the triptych, but it's different in color. Whereas the one behind you would be different because it doesn't have the tertiary lines, the tiny little lines in there. And that was on purpose to give it a lot more air to breathe so you could see the background of it. There's a difference in its, everything is kind of a little bit more modernized to show that after a catastrophe, how it would kind of morph into modern day to survive.
That's so beautiful. I love that. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And tell us about your creative process from conception to completion with this exhibit specifically. Did you start on one specific piece that was like the key piece for inspiration, and then it like got weaved into a bigger body of work? Or did you kind of have an idea of like a general body of work, like ideas for different pieces? I'm curious, what was your process for this entire exhibit?
When I'm creating ideas, the easiest ones are the ones that kind of come to you when you're half asleep and you see this design and you want to create it. And some of the paintings came to me that way. Some of them were designs that I saw that I created that were kind of more traditional in style, but I wanted to adapt it. And then the hardest thing for me is to express to other people what they really mean to me, or what the deeper meaning is, or why I used a certain color. So it's something that I've been working on. So when I created all of the different pieces originally, it wasn't under the title post-apocalyptic. They weren't created originally for that purpose 100%. I came to that title when I started realizing that they all have kind of a similar, deeper meaning, as in evolving to the modern day after surviving. So that's how I kind of came to make a show with them all actually having a very similar meaning undertones. But when it comes to designing something, sometimes it depends on if it comes to me when I'm half asleep, or if I wanted to create a series of the 4 elements. One comes to me, then I need to figure out how to morph the different types of styles into a series to be cohesive but not the same. And then for other things like carvings or the panel behind you, sometimes I have to look at the wood, and the wood also kind of explains to me what direction it wants to go, what would look best on it, how to really showcase the wood in what it wants to do. So especially when it comes to wood pieces or carving, it's more of a mutual understanding. Not to sound too spiritual about it, it's just that wood really decides what it wants to do sometimes.
And what messages or emotions do you aim to communicate to viewers through your work, specifically in some of these pieces that you have here for post-apocalyptic?
Mainly, the same drive that I've been having since I started doing this as a career is that my hope is to showcase that my people have a lot of strength. We have a lot of cultural wealth, that we have a lot to give, that we're here. We have so much knowledge, and the fact that we were able to hold on to majority of it is just amazing, considering we weren't allowed to and we're not supposed to be here anymore. I just want
Mhm.
to showcase that there is so much strength with our people, and that I obviously take pride in my culture and my artwork. And I want to showcase that. And I hope that it shows through to everyone
Mhm.
how I feel about my people and our artwork and our history.
It's very evident, I think, in all of your pieces. There's just so much energy behind each one, not only in the color, but in the movement. The composition is just very powerful. So I can definitely see that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Um, and tell us about the meaning behind your latest body of work about the four elements and their significance.
Well, when I'm doing artwork, um, I do want to create artwork that invokes emotion, but a lot of the times it's also something that I just want to create so other people can easily connect with. And being the four elements, everyone knows about the four elements. Every culture knows about four elements. A lot of people personally connect with one of them being from some sort of astrology sign. And so the water was the first one that came to me. I am a water sign and I love the water. I've always been a water baby. So the design kind of you too. It just kind of like came to me the easiest. And then after that, creating that design and how it flows like water, then I decided to start working on the next ones. And each one has its very unique flow to it. So the water does look fluid like liquid, and then the fire looks rapid. And then the air was interesting because I had to make it something that is not visible. And so in order to design that one, I actually designed it so that the negative was painted, so it was a lot more airy and very light in looking, and I put it on the darker birch that I had so that the white and the light blue would show up. And then when it came to the earth, that one was a little bit difficult for me, and it also happened during the heat wave we had here, which is not normal for us. And so I had a bit of heat exhaustion and I was trying to get it done. And that one is a little bit more blocky, even though it still has flow, because even though it's rocks or mountains and rocks, the earth moves, but it's not as fast. It's very slow and gradual. So it still has flow, but it's a little bit more sharp or blockish in fluid
Mhm.
when you look at them compared to the other ones. And then the fire, even though it's a very neon orange, it's nice and balanced out with the dark red that is a very more traditional color that we use. So we use mainly blacks and reds in our traditional colors, and that's the red that I really like to use, but it balances out in, honestly, it feels like it shouldn't, but looking at it, it kind of makes the orange a little bit more toned down, and the colors and how the balance works is very sporadic, just like it would be with fire. And the flow is kind of, it goes up like fire, but it's also very sporadic in comparison to the water just moving over slowly.
Yeah, I love the monochromatic like palettes for each piece. They're just very intuitive, very beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. Um, and tell us the story behind the tabletop piece that I have here behind me, titled Raven and the Skeena.
So that one, my friend, he planed the cedar wood himself, and his thought was to create a picnic table originally, and I wanted to paint the top of it. And then after I painted it, I felt like it just would look so much better on the wall as a panel instead of a table. And so when I looked at the piece before it was on the table itself, I looked at what kind of design I wanted to put on it. And we live right here by the Skeena River, which is well known for fishing and well known for, we have countless eagles. And then when it happens in March, we have the Amiilukw run, and there's just Amiilukw and birds and eagles and ravens and sea lions, just an abundance here. So when I saw that, I really wanted to put the raven and then the salmon there. And so that's the raven and the Skeena. He's feasting on the salmon. And when I did the design, I also did the thin lines that go with it traditionally. And I actually decided to leave them out because there's already so many lines on there. I wanted to really show that beautiful wood. It just got so many colors in it. It like looking at it in person really more does it justice than any photo does. How beautiful that wood is and like the two tones. So I wanted to leave it a little bit more spacious and airy so you can see the background.
And tell us more about the story behind your mask, the new bird. And this is very different from these panels that you've created for the exhibit. And these are more sculptural. So yeah, tell us the story behind the new bird and what inspired that piece.
So my two carvings there really go more obviously with the post-apocalyptic theme of the exhibition. The new bird is my take on what a lot of people remember from the plague mask from when the bubonic plague happened. And the doctors would wear this really creepy masks and long beak so they look like a bird, and inside there they would either have garlic or flowers, herbs, so that they wouldn't have to smell the death on all the people. And so I decided to take something that was kind of well known and symbolic of that time and bring it to what we now know as like we're going through our own pandemic, and then also make it very First Nations and cultural with a lot of different kind of mixing elements of the past and now. So it's made of yellow cedar that I painted with black acrylic, and then brass rivets in it, and then this leather that I had, and it was already worn like that, and I thought it looked beautiful adding it to it because it already was worn and looked like it was used. So I thought it just had this beautiful feeling once you put it on it, like it's got history in
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I can definitely see that. That's awesome. I love that. Cool. And you also have another mask that is titled, I hope I get this right. You have another mask titled Amiilukw.
Amiilukw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that and the story behind it.
So that's the Nishka word for mask.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
So everyone is kind of been putting their own artistic spin on what we use as masks in everyday life now with COVID. And I wanted to make mine. I wanted to make it kind of a lot of things that we would have in our culture here in the Northwest. So I used yellow cedar with black acrylic. I really like the color black, even though a lot of my paintings there at the exhibition are very colorful. That was a little bit more out of what I'm used to. So it was very nice to do that. But then in the mask, I added rabbit fur and lamb leather and abalone, which is kind of like our jewels that we used here besides copper and a couple other things. So I decided to make it kind of extra, a little bit more like bougie. A lot of it has value. So everything that is on that mask really is something that we in our culture would value. So all of the different furs and everything, and the abalone and the cedar, but then it also ties into that we also value our health. So everyone's wearing masks because we like the idea of keeping ourselves healthy, and that's valuable as well.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I love it. It's such a beautiful mask. Both of them are very interesting and very different than from like anything I've seen as far as like traditional Pacific Northwest coast. And I really appreciate like the unique, more modern take on it.
Very contemporary, yes.
Yeah, I really like that. And what advice do you have for Native people interested in growing their careers as artists, specifically using wood as their medium of expression?
Um, well, I think it's very important for them to know what their cultural connection is. So if you have a specific background, it's really important to actually go and try and learn from people who are within your community and willing to teach you. There's so many people out there with wealth of knowledge, all of our elders, and a lot of them are willing to put in the time and effort to teach because we know that it's something that needs to be sought after nowadays. It's very important to connect with your culture. It's something that many people around my generation, a little bit older, are reconnecting with now. It's something that we, especially now after sitting at home and kind of figuring out our own mentality and who we are, a lot of people are really figuring out who they are and what their background is. So a lot of it is going out there, reconnecting with a lot of your culture, your people, and it's a way of also healing. Like doing our art, especially, it's not just I'm doing art for the purpose of making money. It's very healing to know not only who you are, but also reconnecting by using your hands. A lot of it is with making wood. It's very meditative.
Mhm.
You sit there and many hours fly by for me personally, and I realize that I've been carving for a very long time. Should probably go and eat something. So if you want to learn that, there are people probably within your community that know a lot, and then reaching out to them is usually the best way to go about it.
That's really great advice. And I can definitely relate to the long periods of, working on something that you're just like so deep into, like with your artwork. And time just passes by so quickly. It's really healing and fun and just nourishing. I don't know. I can relate to that a lot.
I definitely, yeah, I really can tell when there's a difference between me and my meditative state, and the time passes by and it's a good feeling. And then I know the difference between when I start kind of going into a trance and I'm working on my perfectionist side of things, because it gets to a point where it's a little too much. And that's a little bit different. There's two different, there's the meditative and then there's the trance like, where you're kind of fixating too much about one little aspect. So I'm working on that.
I can understand that. And I'm also curious before we wrap up, what what is the actual like technique that you're using? And you also don't have to share this, by the way. So if you don't want to, it's okay. But what is the technique that you use to make your form line design? Because they're so precise, and you talked about like your perfectionism and like how you're like, it has to be a certain way and it looks, really smooth and clean. What is your approach to give it that aesthetic, to give it that look?
um, no, I don't mind sharing at all. Yeah, the process is pretty simple actually. More so the process within my mind is a lot more difficult. Is what I'm working on these days. It's a double-edged sword for me personally, because a lot of the times it's what people know my artwork as, but at the same time it's kind of what's keeping me from creating more and more artwork faster, because I want it to be so precise. When I'm creating a piece, usually I draw it whatever size I want to create it on a piece of paper. And I don't like to use a lot of digital. When I do eventually, I'm going to sit down and really learn the ins and outs of using the digital. But I do it on paper and then I scan it and then I put it on my projector and then I put it onto the piece. So whatever it is that I'm painting, whether it be a wall or some sort of shaped canvas, circular, long, square, then I put it on there and I sketch it and then I refix it. because it's always going to be distorted when you put it on a projector. And then I fix it again with a pencil. And then when I outline it with a very thin paintbrush called a rigger, I make sure to do just long continuous lines. I make sure that it has flow, and I go down to like the smallest part of a millimeter to try and make sure that it all connects up and has this beautiful flow with it. And that is the part that takes the longest. And then I fill it in with the rest of like the same color paint, and I try and have a nice consistency so there's no transparency between it.
Wow. I first thought maybe like, oh, maybe this is like a stencil where like you're like getting these precise lines. Just like, how are you making it?
Everything is outlined, everything.
Oh my gosh, that's so impressive. Seriously. We've had multiple people ask like, how did she do that? Like, how did she make it so precise and like smooth? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm gonna find out.
A stencil wouldn't be as precise.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
Where is it? This one. That's my rigger. It's my favorite one. I think it was a 00.
00. Okay.
Yeah. And
Wow.
where I live, we only have one craft store. So if I order online or I see them at the craft store here, I usually buy quite a few just in case.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kari. This was such a really just amazing conversation, and I learned so much, and very grateful to have you at Stonington and grateful to represent you here. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I hope that folks can come out and see your work before the end of the month. And if not, it will be here, and other works as well that are maybe not in the exhibit. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.